Mike Miraglia. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Good. I got your name right this time because the last time I was like Mike Miraglia.
Yeah, no, I'm very impressed when people get my name right because
The first time
is really impressive.
Yeah.
Usually the 7th or 8th time, if they finally get it right, it's awesome.
It's awesome. Well, listen, I'm here for you, buddy. I'm just trying to make your day better.
Thank you.
You were a detective in the city of Boise for some time, and you maintain a position with the Fraternal Order Police as their legislative chair. So you go and talk to legislators and explain the position that law enforcement, or at least specifically the Fraternal Order Police, have on specific bills. And this legislative session, boy, we got some bills coming up. One of them that we're going to touch on today is license plate readers. Now, again, just for people wondering, license plate readers are a technological mechanism that can take a picture at, say, a public intersection, right? Not going into your garage. So picture at a public intersection, transfer that to essentially a data center that just stores for a certain duration of time how long and what the license plate is. And this has been used in very, very national public cases. For instance, attempted assassination with President Trump, the gentleman who was apparently attempting to assassinate him at the golf course, escaped, but they used license plate readers to identify the car and, at least assist in the pursuit and capture of him. So these have a really functional history in our country, but a lot of people really dislike the, Big Brother style government of like, okay, who has this data? Is somebody abusing the data? This is big government watching me everywhere I go. These are the anxieties. Talk to me about license plate readers.
So, yeah, there's a lot to it. There's a lot to kind of unpack with license plate readers. It's like any technology for law enforcement, whether it was when we brought on radar back in the 30s and 40s into the 50s, or more recently body cameras. There's always the side of it where we look at it like, okay, this technology will help us do more with less. It'll help us do a better job of what we're trying to do, which is to protect the public and to solve crimes for people. And so this is just one of those things. And license plate readers have actually been around for quite a while. So they actually, their history really goes back to the early 1970s in London and in England, when they were dealing with the IRA and terrorist bombings. And so that's where they started putting out cameras, and then quickly realized that they needed to be able to track vehicles that were going to do harm to their citizens and things would blow up. And so that system there grew in Europe and in England, basically. And there was even a name for it in London called the Ring of Steel, which was basically this ring of intelligence. They could basically try to thwart an attack before it happened to protect people. And so the technology has grown over the decades. It's become better and better at reading license plates specifically. And that's kind of where we are today. It's become, the prices have gone down, and it's something that's useful to law enforcement. Sometimes what happens though is that people, for one piece, it's kind of, they don't necessarily understand it because they just don't work with it. And
Sure.
it's just, that's normal, how these things go. And I think there's some fears that folks have about it, and it's good that people express that. It's good that they say, hey, I don't know if I like this. And that kind of, to me, that kind of encourages the conversation to say, hey, this is what it is. This is what it isn't. This is where it comes from. Here's how we use it. Here's how we don't use it. So there's a lot of confusion over ALPR, which is automated license plate recognition. I call them license plate readers, LPRs for short. That's kind of the jargon. And then conflating those or mixing those up with traffic cameras. So you have license plate readers, which are different than traffic cameras, which are different than red light cameras, which are different than speed cameras, and then other technologies that are also very much associated with LPR, with license plates, which is weight and motion. Mm-hmm. When you go down the freeway and they do a check station where you're actually driving through, they can capture your license plate and do your weight station, because the weight stations get overloaded basically with too many vehicles during peak hours. Toll booths, parking enforcement, repo. There's all kinds of different areas where this technology kind of interlaces. The ones that we see the most though is the traffic cameras, where folks think the traffic cameras are recording them. that they are capturing your license plate. They're not. I can tell you the ones in Ada County don't record at all. In fact,
What's their function?
it's to basically to monitor the traffic flow at the intersections. In fact, you can get on to Ada County onto the website, and you can actually pull up any of the cameras that are out there as, you know, a private person, and it gives you a little snapshot every, like, I think it's every 15 seconds of the intersection of Fairview and Cole. You can see those things from, so you have access to that. The public has access to it. Just, it's the realization that it doesn't necessarily record everything. It simply collects it for the traffic folks to be able to monitor traffic flows.
Sure.
And
So
things like that.
ACHD can figure out like, hey, we pretty consistently have this like odd bottleneck at 3:45 to 4:20 weekdays right here, right?
Yes.
And like, is that a function of like, there's a horrible light where what street is Expo Idaho on? I can't remember. You're going down 44 and you make a right. Okay. And that intersection right there, I think there's like Walmart or Target or something right on the corner there. That intersection has two lights, right? So that intersection has the main intersection light. And if you head east like 500 feet, there's another light that lets you go into, I think it's like Target, whatever. It doesn't matter. But the point is there's always a backup there because those lights they're not programmed to go off at the same time. So like you have this major intersection that's stopped because a light 500 feet up is letting somebody out of Chipotle. Yeah. So it would effectively be monitoring like, okay, where are these bottlenecks and how do we address them? It's not like, let's record every single person that drives by.
Correct. Okay. So that's kind of the difference. So now if you shift gears over to LPRs, to specifically license plate readers, the purposes that they're used for. The license plate readers you see in Idaho, the purpose of them is to help fight crime. It is to help find people who are missing. It is to basically help the law enforcement mission of doing more, with less resources, less officers on the street, and be more effective. And I can tell you, as far as the influx of LPRs in Idaho, for many folks who work with it, who are in law enforcement, it is a game changer. It is an amazing tool that they're able to then go back to and look at stuff when they're developing, information on cases. Our old method was the needle in the haystack method, where you would have a crime occurs, let's say it's a domestic violence, let's say it's a no contact order, or there was a drug transaction, or there was a robbery, or whatever it was. And you would use your wits and you try to figure out, okay, where could this person have gone?
Right.
Did they go back home? Did they go to their mom's? Did they go to a flop house? Did they go to a hotel? And officers spread out and start looking at all the logical places. And sometimes we get lucky and we find them. Other times we don't get lucky and we don't find anybody.
Right.
This gives just enough of that extra little edge to be able to say, oh, well, they left this location in East Boise, and now 20 minutes later, they're going west on Fairview by Cole.
Sure.
And they're like, oh, wait, he has a girlfriend in Meridian. Head that way. It's that kind of information to help that along, basically, instead of simply the needle in the haystack, go everywhere and try to figure it out.
Right. You have 12 different locations that are spread out in a circle formation. It's like, no. We have high probability who's heading southeast. Oh, there is a target address southeast. Let's go there.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
So it's a tool in that respect.
Right.
And that's the way we look at it. But at the same time, it has so many far-reaching capabilities. You have the real-time tracking. You have the ability, if you're running an ongoing investigation into drug trafficking, fentanyl, let's say, or human trafficking, or you're watching organized retail theft groups who are coming in from other states and they're moving through like a flock of locusts, basically, or whatever the word for locust. I can't think of the. Whatever the group of locusts is. A swarm. Thank you. Yeah, I'm like, what's the word? A swarm of locusts. And they're basically, going to Target and Walmart and all these different places and stealing and going and, pretending to be other people. And so you have that. You have all these abilities to do some real-time tracking on them and kind of get yourself there. So law enforcement can do their job. So you have a lot of the ability to do a quick capture. An example of that, in Nampa this year, there was an armed robbery suspect. And in this case, they actually were able to get enough of detail on the vehicle itself that it was a white truck, which there's only one or two of those in Canyon County, I'm
only
sure.
One or two.
and it had one letter of the plate itself. Well, but what they were able to do, they have a real-time crime center over there, and they were able to basically start looking at those LPR cameras and put that in, and they started getting hits. And within a short period of time, they were actually able to find several vehicles that matched the description and whittle them down based on the information that they had, and found the person and arrested them, which is pretty cool when you do robbery cases, and many times they're gone, and then you have to try to put the pieces back together to figure out where they went, and that sort of thing. So it really does help that a lot.
Have you? I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
You
go ahead.
just made me think of you ever played the game Scotland Yard?
No.
Okay, so I've never thought about it, but when I'm talking to you, it's a detective game, and there's a mystery person. You don't know where the person is. Now it's like 150 little stops on this board, and it's all Scotland Yard in England, and there are different transit options. So you can walk, you can bus, you can walk, you can take a taxi, or you can take like the tube, right? But the bottom line is, you only know how somebody was transporting themselves. You don't know where they went. So if they're at a location that has like 5 different exits, you're like, all right, well, they took a bus or they took a taxi, and like, shoot, they couldn't have gone that far because it was a taxi. Taxis don't move that fast, but they could have gone in any of these directions. So you start guessing. So when you're talking about, hey, we have this truck, we know kind of what the truck looks like. In the absence of this wide swath of data to capture them within a net, like, just thinking about how impossible that game is. It's a great game. Anybody wants to get it off Amazon, but it's really, really hard. And again, if you don't have information, in this case, you have, just a color of a vehicle. It's like, dude, I can't imagine how hard it would be.
Well, and that's the thing. And it always is, we're pretty good at what we do, but we rely on both our skills and our luck, quite frankly. And we do the best we can to try to sleuth out. But there's some times where, I'll pull every trick as a detective, every trick out of my sleeve, and there's nothing left. I might as well be sleeveless at that point. There's just nothing left that I can do to try to develop evidence, which is really what I need in every case, to be able to say, okay, this is the person or this is not. This is where they went or not. All the questions that I need to be able to answer to have a credible case, sometimes we just don't have it. and the LPR is good because it gives us that extra. And it not only gives us the piece of, okay, I have a vehicle and I can track the vehicle and try to figure out what that is. But then it also allows me to go a little bit further, which is, let's say there's a robbery. Can I track that vehicle before the robbery occurred by going back in time an hour, 2 hours before the incident occurred? Was there casing behavior for that robbery? Am I able to demonstrate that individual or that person who was planning it was in the area beforehand? We'll see this on some of the big cases around the country, like the United Healthcare, CEO who was shot, and then other large ones will come in these days. We'll see about them in the news. They're also not just looking at what happened there and where they went and trying to capture them first, obviously to protect the public, but also then to build the case of what happened before, the days that individual was in New York, how they got there, all the things, the connections at the YMCA and all these other things, whatever they can capture on that, to try to put the best picture you can so that you have both the inculpatory information, the stuff that says, yeah, you did it and kind of, not good, and the exculpatory information as well, where we think Joe's the one who did something, but then we can look at the cameras and go, well, Joe's actually telling the truth. He was on the other side of town when this occurred. So things like that. It allows us to do both of those things. So it's a tool, and there's no more than a tool for that. So, and there's so many levels of the cases, and I can get into them, but it's important. A couple of things I think that's really important for people to realize. One of them is what it actually captures. LPRs capture license plates. That's what they do a really good job at. Different angles, all kinds of ways of reading plates, telling the difference between an O and a 0, the color of the vehicle, the basic stuff that you can try to identify the vehicle with. When the systems that we have in Idaho, the way that they function is they will capture a plate at an intersection. There will be a hot list of plates that are connected to state criminal cases, national criminal cases through NCIC and these different programs that we're connected to, different law enforcement databases. And if something has been put into the hot list, then it will give a ping. It will give a response like, hey, this is a hot list, which is then has to be followed up on by an officer to figure out, okay, why did this ping?
Right.
What's the reason and what should be my response to this? If it does not hit on a hot list, that plate is collected as a plate and stored. It does not run the registration on the plate. It does not run the registered owner. It does not run who it is, where it is, why it is, all those other things. It only collects the date, the time, the location of the plate and nothing else. So it's not as all encompassing.
Right. I had a government teacher in high school, Dean Throckmorton, back in the day, and I remember him talking about cameras on the roadways. And this was a conversation we were having when I was 18, because he was like, he got a ticket or something, and the ticket had, and again, this is a different kind of technology, obviously, because you're talking about license plate readers, but he was talking about cameras that were on the freeway, and he had gotten a ticket for something, and it had said like, okay, male and female or two occupants in the vehicle. And he's like, it's looking inside the car. Now, what if I'm a terrible person and I'm having an affair? And again, he was just challenging a bunch of seniors in high school that were idiots to consider what level of, like, is this intrusion if you're driving on a public roadway and, a camera sees you? Like, is it intrusion that it was stored? Is it intrusion that it articulates who's in there? But again, that's a completely different technology. So when I first heard the license plate readers, I instantly, this was like a year ago, I thought about it, I was like, oh, Dean Throckmorton. It's like, he was talking about it. But this is a completely different thing. Like, they're not storing data on who is in the vehicle. They're not running plates unless it's a ping. They're not doing anything. It's like color and license plate.
Correct. Yeah. It basically, and folks talk about, there's some misinformation about AI when it comes to this. Like, they can predict every piece of all your behavior and know where you're going to go and all
what you had for dinner last night.
What you had for dinner and, what's your favorite show on TV? They don't know any of that. The AI is used to read the plate. It is used to tell from various different angles in the dark and many other ways to be able to correctly identify the plate itself. That's really what it's for. Is there ability in AI to be predictive? Absolutely. No one questions that. But the technology is the way that they're used here is not that way. It is simply to be able to better read the plate and be more accurate. And it really, kind of I want to touch on that definitely on kind of the privacy rights.
Sure.
And it's real important. But just to kind of give you a little more on why it's important to law enforcement in terms of the cases. One of the ways it's used a lot is in amber alerts, silver alerts, missing persons. And it's one of those kind of things where, parents or family members or a spouse will say, hey, my husband's missing. He's been gone for 3 days. Maybe I think he's suicidal, or maybe he just didn't say anything, or whatever the reason is. One of the things that this technology does is it allows us to go back to, okay, you said he left home on Monday and it's Thursday, and you decided finally, I've got to do something, I've got to call this in. We can look then at the LPR data and say, oh, okay, we have this person, that day going in this direction over here. So we have a place to start searching. It narrows the search. Because right now, an amber alert, silver alert, it's someone left the house. We know where that is because officers will go investigate, and it's just anyone's guess as to where they might have gone. Right. And so that ability to then reach back a little bit and get a better sense to give people some answers is a really good thing.
Right. You've made the case and again, full disclosure, it's like, I heard about this being an issue like a year or two ago, and I kind of looked into it, and it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But so you made the case for the utility. How do we address, or not we, because like I have heard people and I don't have answers to it. They're like, okay, but how long do they store the data? That's actually a very real concern that I have, which is data storage and data collection is an unbelievable problem. And I'm always worried that my phone or iPad are going off. I'm always worried about computers. And then to know that it's like, okay, well, we're also collecting data on intersections. Mm-hmm. To what end, right? And if it's the kind of thing where it's, 10 minutes, it's probably not valuable to you. If it's 10 years, I don't like that. Mm-hmm. And who is storing it? This was a conversation that I had years ago about drones. That was like, look, who's in control of the drones? Like when we have incredible technology and it comes down to who's behind there, it's like, okay, what's governing them? Like, is it illegal to manipulate this data? Is it illegal to use it for your own personal ends? Or do we have instances where people have used it inappropriate? Like, those are the big concerns, mine and other people's, around this tech. Like, I understand why it's a valuable tool. I don't think anybody would dispute that. Mm-hmm. But I think just like computers in school, like, it's a valuable tool, but what's the cost, right? Like what goes into making sure these bad things don't happen, and what should we consider?
And it's really relevant to ask that question. You know, I'll say this from law enforcement: we live in the same communities. We take our kids to school. We go to the same restaurants. We go to the same ball games. We're in the same boat when it comes to that. We're local law enforcement, so it affects us. It affects you, and it affects us. As far as the concerns, you can't blame people for having concerns. When every day or every week you hear about another breach, you hear about another hacking into some, agency or private file or whatever the circumstance is. Someone overseas has my social security number, kind of thing. And people have to deal with having, LifeLock, and they have to deal with having all of these extra tools they never needed before, because now they can suffer identity theft. I just got one the other day, one of the emails that everyone's been getting in the last year, where it's like, hey, your name is Mike and you live at, oh, by the way, a P.O. box, according to the letter that I received. It's a scam letter. You live at this P.O. box, and you need to breathe and relax, because I'm gonna basically let out all the secret details that I know about you to the world, and I have all kinds of really great skills that I can look at you through the camera on your phone, all this junk. It's hogwash. It's baloney.
Well, that one is, but the one I got last week, that was from one of my kids' schools, that was like, by the way, we legit had a data breach and we're just letting you know. And we're like, wait a minute, you have some degree of like medical records, like you have absences and reasons for this, like you have real information. And so again, like when we talk about storing data, I'm like,
and I'm not discounting.
Sure.
I'm not discounting the response.
But you're also not losing sleep over the guy that you heard from.
Well, no, not at all. That's just, I just laugh and click delete on that. I mean, that's just so ridiculous. But my point is, it's not surprising that people are concerned, right, that they want to know. Right. So it's not that's why I say it's a great conversation to have. As far as the data itself, so there's several things to unpack when it comes to that sort of thing. One is, who stores the data? So the data is stored by the vendors for the most part, unless a police organization has their own servers. That's how it's stored. But it's very different. Some folks have brought up some of the contract information with regards to the private vendors, the tow companies, and the parking groups, and hotels, and all the different private areas where the information is shared with the vendor. When it comes to the law enforcement contracts, which are separate and distinct, they have to follow CJIS rules. They have to follow the Criminal Justice Information System rules, or services, however they say that one. And that's a whole different ball of wax, because the data, because it can have personally identifiable information, has to be securely stored. It has to be securely transmitted. It has to be kept under a series of protocols to keep it safe, and to allow the law enforcement customer to control it. The law enforcement customer, which could be the county or the city or whomever, has a contract, and it is designed that they decide when to delete it. They decide who has access, and it's under all those rules that it's kept. And it's something that people don't realize, that it's been around. CJIS has been around since the 90s. We fall under another area for intelligence information, 28 CFR. There's so many, Part 23. There's so many access controls. There's so many audits. There's so many rules, and there are so many penalties, like lose your job, lose your livelihood, go to jail, for law enforcement officers who misuse information. And don't get me wrong, there's a couple of people out there in the country who have done that, where they do something stupid. They check to see where their ex-girlfriend went, kind of thing. There was one example that I saw of a lieutenant in the Midwest who basically utilized the LPR system specifically, not just general database, but that one, to stalk his ex-wife. He not only lost his job, he was charged with a felony stalking. There's penalties in this. It is not like it's just, it's not like it's just a free for all.
Right.
And that's why I think people, they don't realize that we live in that environment of always being very cautious about how we approach data, where we put ourselves, so that we're not crossing the line. And it's a conversation, and it's something that it's always evolving with the technology. How else do we safeguard the technology?
And bottom line is, like, you can have bad actors anywhere. The question should be, are they brought to justice? Yeah. Right? Like, you're not going to stop criminals from being criminals. And at the point when somebody uses this data inappropriately, they become a criminal. So the question is like, okay, are there cases where this has been manipulated or misused that go unprosecuted? That would be the question. It's like, how prevalent are those, and do they exist? And if the answer is that's not even something we necessarily have a case for. And the cases we do have where it's clear that somebody misused it, they were brought to justice. It wasn't like a slap on the wrist and go back to work the next day.
No, not at all. And it's very significant. And in the years and the decades that I was in law enforcement, it has been growing and growing in that direction of how do we protect that? How do we hold you accountable for that? And you have to have accountability measures. Sure. Is someone going to do something wrong? Is someone going to screw something up? Probably. But what's the accountability? What, on the flip side, how is that pursued? As far as the accountability and the access with regards to these systems, it is, to quote another individual who actually works for Motorola, it is down to a keystroke. It is down to who inputted the information, who requested the data, what was the case type that they used. Did they ask 5 times in 10 minutes to look at the same vehicle? Why? All these things that would trigger an audit, trigger a special look, are there in the technology. And so it's important for people to realize that it's not the Wild West. It's actually very well controlled. Is it possible that the data can be breached? Of course. Is it possible that someone can hack it? Like everything else in our world, of course it is. But do you throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do you go, okay, then we can't have anything because there's at least the remote possibility that someone could do something wrong? But if there's auditing and there's accountability, that's why it's there. And that's why when it does its job, it does its job.
Right. Are you catching more criminals than you're making?
Exactly.
Like, how about that?
You should be catching way more criminals than you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if you don't, I mean, again, just like you're articulating, there are, I was listening to an interview with Zuckerberg recently, where he's talking about how they use at Meta, they have all kinds of sophisticated stuff to figure out if somebody or something is actually a bot instead of a human. They're like, yeah, they're these really classic. There's like, is somebody moving, doing 1,000 operations a second? Like, a human being's not going to do that, right? And in what you're articulating, it seems really easy. It's like, look, if somebody's requested to look at the same license plate or all of these things, you're like, all right, well, hey, why are you looking at that license plate? Like, what happened? And then start justifying the behavior. You could catch some nefarious behavior really, really quickly, I'd assume.
Exactly. And that's the thing. And that's where the access controls and those things count. Now, as far as the question you asked, as far as data retention.
Yes.
And so I was kind of getting to that a little bit before, and I'll kind of go a little deeper into that. So the timing issue is such that, like, to put it mildly, some rules are a little bit too tight. You have individuals who feel like any amount of data retention time-wise is too much if it doesn't hit a hot list. The problem with that is, if your house is burglarized, if a bank is robbed, if someone is abducted, if someone's a missing person, and I think it's New Hampshire that has a 3-minute rule to purge the data, you might as well not be spending taxpayer money on that. You're wasting money because it takes time. It takes an hour, 5 hours, 10 hours, 20 hours, whatever time, or the days or weeks it takes to report something, to say, hey, this happened and I need justice. The data's gone. Once it's gone, it's gone. So there's no way to be able to go back and pull it back out. That's how the rules work in terms of, once they set that guideline. And so you have to think, okay, what's a reasonable amount of time to hold data? And so what we do is we look at the cases that we do and how we do different types of cases, and what timing it realistically takes to figure something out. I can tell you that I've had cases where it takes weeks or months to get to the point of being able to look at a license plate. I had a homicide in Boise a few years ago. And there were 5 individuals involved, and there was a getaway driver. But because of the nature of the information that I was able to pull out without LPRs, without that technology, it took me 7 months to figure out the identity of the getaway driver, which would be my car, which would have my physical evidence of the murder in it. 7 months to have a license plate. Sometimes it takes a while. And then now I've got to go to a judge and I've got to say, okay, I need this car. Here's all the reasons I think this car is related to my crime. Can I have a search warrant to seize that vehicle? Well, it'd be nice if I had a bunch of LPR data I could have gone back to and go, and by the way, Your Honor, 20 minutes before the incident, it went through this intersection. 30 minutes after it went through this intersection. Something else, one more little piece of probable cause to say, here's what I have. Can I please, do my job?
And that would have potentially taken months to even get to that point.
Exactly. And so, but then the LPR also does help, because then if you can reach back within a couple of days to look at all that stuff, maybe I can correlate something based on one little tidbit of evidence. Like in this case, it was a gold car, and look at all gold cars. Maybe that would have sped up the process. But the bottom line is it just takes a while sometimes. Sometimes things don't happen fast. Another thing on the time frame is getting into the missing person cases. Missing person cases, they don't always have a criminal nexus. Everyone feels that my daughter would never leave the house. She would never do this. It must be foul play. I'm a dad. I totally respect that. But that doesn't mean I have probable cause for that. And if I don't have probable cause for that, I cannot get into their cell phone. I cannot look into people who I think might be suspects in their cell phones. I can't get that data without a search warrant. One case like that was back in 2016. It was the missing BSU student, Sierra Bush. That was my case. For the first month, I was unable to develop enough articulable suspicion to say that she was abducted, as opposed to simply walked away and went and did whatever she was going to do. And she had her life and she would decide to do that. Did I have suspicion that something bad happened? From day one. But could I prove that? Could I articulate that to a judge? No, which means, and we even tried to get a search warrant for cellular and other kinds of data to figure out where she might be. We were unable to do so. We were denied that because we didn't have enough. It's as simple as that. And if I don't have probable cause, LPR data might give me something. At her house, at the intersection, there was a traffic camera right there that in its static location captured her house. And her father's like, hey, there's a camera right there. Why don't you guys check the camera? And I had to explain to him that it doesn't record anything. It gives me nothing that I can work with at that point in time. And that's a horrible thing when then fast forward to we do have probable cause that she was murdered and taken from the house and dumped in the next county in a river. And it's one of those things that you can only do what you can do. It's not what I think or what I know, it's what I can prove on these things. And so you need evidence sometimes. And that's where it's difficult. And an LPR gives me the ability without a search warrant to actually look at stuff and maybe get to that point of probable cause. It allows me to do that. But again, time frames, it takes time.
And so the bottom line is if you have a same day purge or even a week purge or even potentially a month purge,
yeah,
you are going to, just by the nature of police work, that look, I would have no idea that these investigations take months and months, right? For me, I was thinking like, oh, just dump it every couple weeks. But again, I've never been a detective, so I don't have the burden of utilizing this tool. But yeah, it sounds like you're saying, hey, look, man, things up to like 12 months. And again, we're talking about color of a vehicle and a license plate. Mm-hmm. Those types of things take time to utilize this data to present everything you have. Yeah, man, that's rough.
Well, and it happens every day and all the time. And it's something that we never had as far as a tool, at least in Boise. We still don't have LPRs in Boise. Other jurisdictions around the state do. And it is...
Kootenai County's had them for like 20 years, haven't they?
Yeah, like 14 years or something like that. They've had them for a long time, and they've been extraordinarily effective. Extraordinarily effective in so many, the big cases, the little cases, to every case in between. They're an amazing resource, and that's the reason why. That's the reason why they exist. That's why jurisdictions all over the country go for them. And it's one of those things where it really makes a big difference. The latter part of my career, in the last couple of years before I retired, I had the ability of using LPR data. One was a kidnapping rape case, and then tracking down the suspect in the case using LPRs. Other ones that we worked with were with different jurisdictions who they had the LPR data for robbery suspects, homicide suspects. I mean, there's just so many. Twin Falls, the hospital shooting back in 2024 over at St. Al's here, Meade and Umpenauer, after they committed that act, they basically fled up north and murdered 2 individuals, 2 elderly men, and then they were captured on LPR down in Twin Falls for a vehicle that was associated with them. That's what got them captured, because they already shot at corrections officers. They already murdered 2 more people. How many more things were they going to do to do the things that they were planning to do? How many more bad things were going to happen to society until the Twin Falls LPR pinged and they had something to work with there to be able to capture these people and put them back where they belong? And so that's where, it is such a powerful tool when it works. Does it capture a whole bunch of plates that are innocuous and are mine and yours? And yeah. And does that sit in a file for a while? Yeah. And is it eventually deleted? Sure. Yeah, that is exactly the case. And so, we always look at, okay, how do we do the most effective job, but how do we also minimize the impact on good people? And that's always what we want to do. And so time frame wise, as much time as possible. I would say it should be a conversation, to be honest. You might have a jurisdiction that has a lot of resources, and perhaps they have enough intel analysts that, there's a big crime, there's a murder, there's a shooting at the mall, there's whatever is going on, and they need to dig into that data, and everyone and their grandmother comes to bear, and they all do the work. And maybe it takes them a few days or a few weeks to go through the thousands of vehicles, to figure out what they need to figure out. Or maybe you have a jurisdiction like Moscow, Idaho, that has like 2 detectives and, just a very small, they don't have the resources. And so that can have a big effect on the ability of small jurisdictions who have access to it to get to the point where they can do that, because they also have to do the interviews. They also have to do the crime scene. They also have to do the DNA. They have to do the fingerprints. They have to do all the other things to not just think they know, but prove it in court. And there's a lot. That laundry list is long, and the bigger the crime, the longer that thing gets. All the stuff that needs to be done takes a lot of time and effort. LPR, the ability to hold that, helps that, basically.
Man, you make a strong case. Data storage, inappropriate handling of data. What's the last big? Is there one more big thing that people are concerned about? Because those seem to be the things that and what are they doing, right? It's like, they're not checking who's in your car. It's like, this is what they're doing. This is how long it's stored for. This is who's storing it and what happens to them if they mismanage it.
I think there's the slippery slope argument. I think there's folks who believe, oh my God, this is like new and scary. And I think we've touched on that already. But I don't blame them. I mean, we get that. We completely get that as law enforcement. There's the part of, well, where is my privacy end? Or what's the amount of information? How does this affect, my expectation of privacy in a public space? And, the courts have ruled that you don't have an expectation of privacy on a public roadway. When you think about it, the reason you have a license plate is so that it can demonstrate what your vehicle is.
Right.
It basically demonstrates the registration of your vehicle. It allows your vehicle to be identified. It's as simple as that. It's required by law. You can't leave mud on it. You can't put a screen on it. You have to have lights on the back one so that, a police officer behind you can see it. So there's all these reasons, these very obvious reasons as to why we have them. I think there's a concern that the level and the volume of data can get to the point where you're being surveilled in public, you're being tracked. The courts, there was a court case in 2018. It was Carpenter versus the U.S. And in that one, they made it clear that cell phone data, needs a search warrant. Cell phone data, which they described as, and I quote, almost a feature of the human anatomy, is what the courts see it as. Something that is so intrusive that and we understand that, right, intrinsically, because we all have cell phones attached to our hands, as we're going through our lives these days. And so it can track so many things, so many personal things, so much information that is completely understandable. And from that case, folks have said, well, does LPR get to that point? The courts have said no. One of the cases that was, I think it was U.S. versus Bowers back in 2021. And the court ruled that no, LPR data is not the all-encompassing surveillance that cell phones are. Right. They're not the same. They're very different. Yeah, the Bauer case is kind of interesting.
I'd let you watch my license plate 1,000 times over before you get into my phone.
Right, exactly. Yeah, you can take it all day long.
Listen, point made. Like, I understand.
Yeah, no, and that case is kind of interesting too, because that was the case. Bauer was the suspect in the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, back in I think it was 2018.
That was a synagogue attack.
The synagogue attack, yeah, back in October of 2018. And the counties over there who were doing the investigation, they wanted that preamble data. They wanted to go back, 4 months or so, whatever they did, to see did this guy come in before? Was he casing the place? What was the pre-op type stuff that they could figure out? And they figured out that he had crossed over into their little area there and hit a traffic cam close by 106 times over a period of like 140 days. And the court's like, yeah, that's not all encompassing. I mean, quite frankly, if I drove down a street in Nampa, one of the main boulevards, and every day I pass by 3 or 5 cameras, and I pass by them on my way home from work. Okay, you were late that day because you went at Dutch Bros and it was a long line. I mean,
it's trash coffee, bro.
I know. No offense to Dutch Brothers, but
no, full offense. I can't. They don't even have drip coffee. All they do is an espresso in hot water, and they call it coffee. I'm like, it's not fit for swine.
My plug for Dutch Brothers, I like drip coffee, so
it's terrible. And my problem with the human being is that it's never hot. It's always lukewarm. And I talk to the gals because you want to survey me, talk to the girls at that human being, because they know me.
Yeah.
And I'm like, listen, why is your coffee never hot? They're like, when the alarm goes off, we don't rebrew. I was like, son of a gun.
Uh-huh. So it's one of those things where, there's those kind of things. Yeah. It's just, I think the measure of it is important. Another thing that's been out there lately is, this is more liberal, kind of a liberal bent to it. This is like liberal states and Californication of Idaho and all these, things that are coming in. Well,
can I just say real fast, I have a brother-in-law in Berkeley PD. He's been there for 20 something years. Mm-hmm. Liberals are not friendly to law enforcement. So if the idea is let's go ahead and do something that helps detective catch rapists and potential murderers and stuff, that's not a liberal thing. They're not helping law enforcement down there.
No, and that's where it's kind of, but it is something, it's one of the recent things that people are saying. They think that's what it is. And here's the reality of it. The reality of it is, for commercial LPRs, the 4 largest users of states in the United States are Illinois, Chicago, California, Texas, and Florida. And it's where the most vehicles are stolen. That's what actually constitutes that. If you look online, you can Google search this to find all the different states and all the different jurisdictions around the country that actually have LPR. You're looking at the Missouris and the Alabamas and the West Virginias and the Floridas and the Tennessees and Texas and Utah and everybody. And they're not just the major cities. They're actually a lot of smaller jurisdictions. And there's a reason why. Because it works. Because it helps us do our job to keep people safe. That's why conservative cities and counties all around the country use this technology. Because it's actually effective.
Mike, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for explaining this. I'm sure we'll know more about what the legislature is thinking as time goes on. And if other people have concerns about this, I'd love to hear about it and, understand that, because look, I don't know anything about law enforcement. I do know that the people I know in law enforcement work really, really hard. And they're obviously, I mean, the concept of like, just with the spread of social media and taking snapshots of somebody saying like, hey, this, on TikTok, whenever I go to post something on TikTok, there's always a video of like some cop that, is like doing something bad. I don't even know how long ago these videos are from. Like it could be years and years. Like, all right, you caught somebody like 2 years ago being a jerk. But again, everybody I know, especially in the cases that you're talking about, are working hard to bring justice to criminals and protect people.
Well, and that's the thing. And that's where it's tough because, and it's tough, but we expect it. Yeah. We understand that. We live on that thin blue line. You make a traffic stop on somebody and, every officer worth their salt has heard, well, why don't you go catch a real criminal? On the flip side, we have all been at a location where like, God, I wish there's never an officer when you need one. So it doesn't matter. It's basically, we understand that. We respect that. Yeah. We want to have that level of transparency. We want to have that level of trust. And it happens through forums. It happens through conversations. It happens through us engaging on these issues and hopefully give people a little more comfort that it's not just the Wild West. It's not just we're just doing stuff because we want to, we want to surveil and control and do all this stuff. It's because we really do want to help people have better lives, safer communities, because we live in these communities.
Right, and there should be scrutiny.
Yeah, absolutely.
There should be like, hey, this is what, like, ask every question you can. And again, I don't know anything about law enforcement, but I do know every time I've asked you to come on and explain something, you've been all for it. And I don't, like the questions I have are genuine questions that either I have or I've heard people have, and you always answer them. So I appreciate your willingness to have this conversation. Thank you for coming in today. Let's do it again.
All right. Thank you.